Tear out when you're hand planing. Who needs it? How can it be avoided? Let's have a look how it occurs. You'll note this plane is not doing too bad a job as it planes with the grain, but as it hits the different contours and then planes against the grain, you'll notice the shavings start to crumple and splinter. This is exasperated on hardwood. As you'll note, this plane come into what they call a shuddering stop. Hi, Ben from Ben Construct here, and we're going to look at tear out, what causes it, and what you can do to resolve the problem. Okay, let's get to it. So taking a look at this piece of timber, where the grain is it relatively straight or surfacing to the top. As the plane passes over this, what's going to happen then is it's going to sever the grain as it passes along the top edge, and it's going to leave you behind a fairly smooth surface. However, if you reverse that against something like this, an oak or pine, doesn't really matter, and then plane against that, you can imagine then you're going to get an occurrence which is a bit like this. It's going to dig into the grain, and rather than cutting it at the surface, it's nearly going to pluck it or club it out from behind. And as you'll notice, what happens, it lifts the fibres in front of it, also causing them to have the same thing to happen. And behind the blade, you've got tear out, and then you're going to have to repair it. So that's in short how it occurs. And now we'll get on to how you can actually stop this from happening or minimize it. Three planes we're going to look at today are going to be the smoothing plane, a jack low angle plane, and we'll also be using a jointing plane, which has got a couple of features unusual to normal jointing planes, but we'll go through that in a second. Let's start with the smoothing plane. Now, what can you do with this? Well, one thing you can do is to close the mouth on the smoothing plane. Here it's relatively tight, 1-2 millimeters apart. You can close that right up to just about allows a slither of a shaving to go through it, so that can be improved on, and that's done by doing this with the plane. Taking your lever cap off, your blade out, you'll see that there's two screws in here which lock the frog of the plane in. Now if you loosen those and just tap that forward, tighten it, replace your blade until you get a closed mouth in that. Okay, what else can you do with this? Well, the other thing, because it's a traditional plane, it's got a chip breaker, and the chip breaker is clapped on with a screw at the back, and if you loosen that, you can actually push that chip breaker very tight to the edge, 0.5 millimeter or less, 64 and less than that of an inch. So that's what that does. What do these actually do? What do you achieve by doing this? Okay, so the one thing, by closing the mouth, if you imagine that that's your blade, and you come in and you close the mouth up, that base in front of that will hold the grains down or the fibers of the wood down until they're forced to be cut, especially when you bring that really tight. So that keeps the grain down, and it allows the blade to cut right at the surface without any pulling up of the fibers. With the chip breaker, by sliding that forward, if you can imagine this now being the chip breaker tight up to the tip of it, it also gives an action of forcing the fibers to stay down until they're cut. And then by the fact that it's diverting them at a steeper angle, it creates a much sharper cutting point for the blade. And both these are very effective ways of actually reducing your tear out. Okay, so let's have a look now at the low angle plane. Now these are favoured by a lot of people because they have a super quick adjustable mouth. You don't have to do anything with the frog. By loosening that knob there, the mouth opens up. And with this particular one done by Veratus, you've got a thumb screw which allows you to either fine tune how much the mouth closes, or it works as a stop, so you can have it preset to give you a a tight blade or open up. And as you can see there now, set for a tight, and I can do that in seconds, or not even that. And then you've got a super tight mouth. So that's the big advantage of them. There is another one that's which is also favoured, and that is to get a spare blade. Now, because it's got the bevel up on the low angle plane, by changing the angle of the blade, it gives you a different angle of attack for the wood. And this swaps out incredibly fast. Always just open your mouth when you're swapping blades. Just by taking off your leather cap, out comes the normal low angle 30-degree angled blade. In goes the 43-degree angled blade for high figured wood or hardwoods. It's quite good for dealing with hardwoods. Back in it goes. Back in with your leather cap. There's no chip breaker, obviously. Oop, that didn't go down. There we go. That's better. Back in with your leather cap, and it is nearly ready to go. Your usual fine adjustments then to get it, aligned. And again, straight away then, close your mouth, and you've got a high angle of attack and a tight mouth. Very quick, and that's why a lot of people favor these. Okay, and then coming then finally to the jointed plane. This one again by Woodworkers. It's got a nice little trick in this one, in that the mouth of it can be adjusted, and by undoing that one, I can, you can see that, open the mouth when I'm sculpting off high amounts of wood, or I can close it. Again, it's got that thumb screw there, which is set. Retighten this, and I am ready to go with a tight mouth and that. Very useful. And with this one, I have got a secondary blade for this, which I've given this. It's got its usual 30-degree angle on that, but on the back of it, I've given it a reverse bevel on the back of it, which is at 15 degrees. And together with the 45-degree angle of your traditional plane will give me an attack then of 60 degrees on the wood. So obviously that is the other way up. By creating that back bevel, then I've got 60 degrees, and this is also very effective for reducing tear out. Okay, and what timbers are we dealing with today? Well, we've got a straight grain piece of pine, a knotted piece of pine, some mahogany then, which has got a reversing grain going through it, and then we've got the monster of the whole lot, which is the oak, which has got grains running all over the place, little knots being incorporated, again knots, and you can see how behind the knots just is often where you get your problems with your tear out. Okay, so let's have a look at those. And before we start, we're just going to take this straight grain wood and give it a swipe with this plane. I'm going to point out a couple of things here. That shaving is a little bit raggedy, and when I go to a closer examination of the wood, I can actually see tear outs occurring even though this is a straight grained pine, and that tells me there's something wrong with the plane in its setup or the blade. But let's take you in, and I'm going to show you how to identify this, and then we'll have a look at the plane itself.
So looking at this here, if you look carefully in the joints of the wood, you can see that there's tear out in seams occurring. And if we just show another bit, which might be a bit clearer, they're just in long streaks parallel to each other, several, 4 or 5 together there. And we'll just try and see a little bit if we can get a clearer picture here now. There we go. As you can see, you've got tear out in between the seams of the wood, and there's something not quite right with the plane. So let's have a look.
Now that side of the blade is quite smooth, but one thing I can feel on this, you possibly can't see it, is I can feel a burr on the upper edge of the blade. It's quite sharp and raggedy, and that is telling me straight away that blade has had a blade tip failure where it's curved over. I have used it on some hardwoods recently, and it does need to sharpen. But if you were to do this on a low angle plane, you'll find that that tip failure occurs again on the upper edge of the blade. So there we are. We haven't got a sharp blade, and that's the first thing we need to rectify. And it's one of the most important things of getting rid of your tear out. Sharp blade is absolutely tantamount, and that was on a straight grain wood, so that has to be got right first of all. Okay, so I've just resharpened this, and we're ready to drop that back in, and obviously hopefully get rid of those tear out streaks. You'll note here though that the I'm not pushing the chip breaker very far forward. It's actually probably over a 16th of an inch away from the tip, if you can see that. And the reason for that is the newer planes with the thicker blades, they don't actually need a chip breaker for normal use or for straight grain or planing with the grain. It's only when you get into difficult grain that you might want to nudge the chip breaker tighter to the tip of the blade. Okay, so we'll drop that in there and see how this works out. That feels much better now. Much better. Okay, let's have a look. Well, that's totally reduced it. There's a small bit here, but if you can see, as you can see, the grain actually swerves up a little bit. I can probably take care of that by shallowing the cut a small amount. And with this one, we can actually close the mouth. We've got a tight mouth then. And that has taken care of that as well. That's perfectly smooth. Now I don't need to sandpaper that. Moving on then, let's have a go at some more challenging wood. Let's have a go at this one with the knot and see what we can do with that. And to start this off, I'm going to open the mouth right up, and we'll just see where this takes us. Now everything here is perfect. Let's just have a quick look at this bit here. As you can see, rather predictably, we've got the tear out straight behind the knot. And if you look down at the ground below, the grain below, it's surfacing there and going, and you're penny against the grain. So we've got a problem here. Okay, so what should we do? We're going to switch over now to the smoothing plane, which has got the tight mouth and the chip breaker shoved right tightly up to the tip of the blade. Let's give that a shot. Light reduction there now. It is reducing it. It's just going to take a few more swipes to get really at it. Nearly gone. Slightest touch there. And that, my friends, has gone. Let's get you in and have another look at that. And as you can see, zero tear out. Around this side in case that light is affecting it. Perfectly smooth all around the knot. That's what we want to see. So that took care of it. Tight jaws and the chip breaker pushed up to the top. So let's also see while we're here how good the low angle plane is at taking care of this with the tight jaws. And again, no problem at all. So just by tightening the jaw and a sharp blade, not taking too much of a big cut, will take care of that. Okay, let's move on to something a bit more trying, like this mahogany reversing grain wood. And again, we'll start with an open mouth, and this one has the chip breaker left back 1/16 of an inch or further from the actual tip of the blade. Let's see what happens. And right away, we're getting chatter and tear out down these seams. The other ones are quite smooth, going in the right direction. So let's have a look. Let's see what the smoothing plane can do with this. And without any more to do, that's perfectly smooth. So there's no big problem with that. Low angle. And again, no issues there. So we'll move straight on to the real problem wood, the oak. Let's get that one up here. Okay, with the open mouth first of all, and the chip breaker back from the tip. And that, if anything, it's actually making that tear out worse. I'm going to get you in to have a look at that.
Shush, your walk is in not for another half an hour.
And as you can see, it's fairly atrocious amount of tear out, so thick it'll actually take several passes even with the right plane on this to recover that piece of wood. Okay, so we'll hit it then with the smoother, the low angle then, and we might even try a high angle blade in there, which we may well need for that. And that's done pretty well. There's a little bit left here now. For that, we might just try the high angle. Let's get you in and have a look at this stage. Okay, so as you can see, that's vastly improved. There's still a couple of areas of tear out. And we'll have a go. We'll first have a go with the low angle jack plane, and then if that doesn't clear it up, we're going to pop a high angle blade into it. Now, not really expecting there to be too much difference. They're both actually really, what we're doing is really the same thing. No difference in angle, or very little. Both got tight mouths on it. Just check my mouth. Go a little bit tighter there, perhaps.
Big advantage here of the low angle and the adjustable mouth is it can be done on the fly.
And really, it's not doing any more than the smoothing plane. So let's drop that 43-degree blade into it and see if that helps matters. Obviously, when you add that to the 12-degree bed of the low angle, you've got a 55, which is otherwise known as a York pitch, or York plane, as they used to be even made with the frog at that angle. Let's see how that does.
Shush, would you stop it? Everyone's going to think I'm abusing you.
Just going to reduce the blade a little bit heavy for dealing with this kind of wood. And that certainly is reducing it. I am going to tighten the blade just slightly more, really bring it into a slither. There we go, 0.5 millimeter or less even now. And very light shaving. And we have nearly got rid of that tear out now. If you try this yourselves, what you'll find is there is going to be considerably more resistance. But the tear out is pretty much gone. Let's get you in again. As you can see, that's nearly immaculate. Slight score there, perhaps. But if I keep on passing that, I'll get rid of that as well. Okay, so there you are. High angle blade, tight mouth, sorted. Didn't even have to go to the 60 degrees. That 55 York took care of everything. So, summary. Identify the grain direction, reduce the cut of the blade, resharpen the blade, close the mouth, bring your chip breaker to within 0.5 millimeter or 1/64th of the end of the tip of the blade. You can change to a high angle blade, and you can even steepen the angle of your chip breaker. Now, what I'm talking about there is when you receive a normal chip breaker, this is a typical old traditional one, that angle which intersects the blade at is normally only about 40 degrees or 42 degrees, and it's honed, generally speaking, to an angle of 45 degrees. I have mine at 70 degrees, and much more, much more nearer to the right angle of the blade, and I find that helps. With the high angle, turning your traditional blade into a high angle, be sure when you make that bevel that it's only a 0.5 millimeter wide, and I'm going to show you how that's done now anyway. So you get your stop or protrusion stop. I've got one set here at 15 degrees, so pop that on your bench, in with your jig and your blade, only this time you're going to flip it up the opposite direction into the protrusion stop. Snug it up. And then when you come to your sharpening stones, because that blade is already sharpened previous to that, you can go straight to your 10,000 or 8,000 finishing stone to create that bevel. And when you do it only on a pull stroke, as you're going to find. If you actually go forward, you may dig into the stone, you damage the blade and obviously the stone as well. And repeat this now. That bevel only needs to be less than 0.5 millimeter. It doesn't need to be a big, if it's a big massive bevel like that, you're going to get the chip breaker nowhere near it. So it does need to be a very fine a bevel at the top of it. It doesn't need to be any more than that. So there we go. And that kind of summarizes up to date, other than to say that for quick fixes on difficult grain, the master of that is your low angle jack plane. That quick mouth opening, the change of blade is so quick, it's a master. But bear in mind this, with a traditional plane, you can imagine once you've got yourself a high angle blade, yeah, and then add in a chip breaker into that as well, it's going to be able to handle much more difficult grains than the low angle plane will be. So don't deny the traditional plane. That chip breaker can be, for some woods, the only one you can use. Okay. Thanks for listening, and that's Ben Construct. Bye for now.